Amen. All right, standing, please take a seat.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CFC San Jose. Welcome home. It's good that you're here with us, gathered as one body. And even though we're gathered separately, physically, we are not separate spiritually with the Lord that ties us all together by His Spirit. And it's a beautiful day to worship today. The weather outside is wonderful. It's really encouraging. And hopefully, sooner than later, we'll gather once more to worship together. And with that said, today's sermon, I wanted to start again and a reminder, kind of an encouragement that the next couple months, we're going to kind of be unfolding a little bit about a little bit of a crafting a vision for our church moving forward through 2021. And I wrote this vision down, and I think it's still fluid, but we're still kind of starting to iron it out. And what it says is that our church, CFC San Jose, exists for the purpose of glorifying God, and it's my next slide, through leading people into a genuine relationship with Him by the transforming work of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this happens through the preaching and teaching of His word, which we're doing now, through the cultivation of discipleship in the individual and the community's life together. And this happens through our small groups, salt shakers, through Oasis, through Journey, through MCF, and through all the different ways we gather as a fellowship, and through the loving and serving of our neighbors in Silicon Valley and our world. And that's the ways that we reach and we love our neighbors. And this is something I think we already are doing, but I kind of want us to rethink and repurpose ourselves to this next season as we plan kind of into a new normal post COVID. And as people are getting vaccinated in the next half a year to a year, we may come back together in some form of personal worship and live gathering, and more people will be feeling comfortable to do so. I wanted us to kind of have something to step forward together as a church. And three things I've kind of laid out for us, ways that we can think about this. And kind of the title of our mini series is Purpose, Passion, and Presence. And the question is, what is our purpose here? And I kind of talked about that last week or 2 weeks ago in our Westminster Shorter Catechism reference when I said, what is the chief end of man? And the answer in that statement is our chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Now, that's a very great statement that encapsulates kind of what our purpose is as a people and as community. And the question I asked myself with this was then, how does these three P's kind of work into our faith, into our church ministry, and our calling as we're present here in San Jose? So I thought, well, we need to think about what our purpose is. What is our passion? What are we passionate about? And lastly, how will we be present in our world? And the way we've started to talk about this over the next couple months is to kind of lay out some foundational thought on what does it mean then to love God completely, right? Based around Matthew 22, and to love our neighbors creatively. What does it mean to love Him fully with such a completeness and to love our neighbors creatively? So we're going to be looking at Matthew 22. We're going to be looking at other places where this is referenced. What does it mean to love our neighbor? What does it mean to love God? And, we're a Chinese heritage church, but that's not all that we are. We're not just a church that sits around and focuses on just our cultural, but we are building bridges not only within our community from Chinese to the English side, but we also have to consider and continue to move forward outward out of our comfort zone. And I think that encapsulates kind of what the vision is of what the church continues to become when you look from Acts through Revelation, right? But we are continuing to unfold that. And how will we connect and cultivate this perspective of being a church that reaches our neighbors and is present in our world? And so I think today in our second sermon in this kind of mini series, and I want you to understand the guest speakers that come in have talked to me, and I kind of craft around these mini series parts sermons that will challenge us to think about our faith and what it means to grow. So these are all going to be complementing each other through this season until we finish this group of sermons and around purpose, passion, and presence. So where are we going? And last time I spoke, we talked about what does it mean to love God completely? What does it mean that it says in Matthew 22, verse 37, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And we went to the source. We went to the original text that was being quoted in Deuteronomy 6, that we have to first love God completely. And everything starts with that idea. But what does that look like then to love God completely and to love our neighbors? What does it look like in our worlds to live out our faith in Christ? And that's kind of what we're going to look at today. And I think the question comes up and becomes one of the greatest questions that people struggle with throughout our lives. And what we're going to look at is two places where this question was posed to Jesus in a form, and Jesus responds with an answer. And we're going to use Matthew 22, verses 34 to 40 as our main reference. But I'm going to read Matthew or Mark chapter 12, verses 28 to 34. Let me copy this real quick so you guys can see it, so in case you guys want to look it up yourselves. Okay. And these two sections, I'm going to read them really quickly, and then I'm going to go over it and talk about how Jesus' answer addresses how we are to live out our faith. Okay. And so the verse 34 to 40 in Matthew 22 says this. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. And then you go to Mark chapter 12, verses 20 to 34, and a similar question is posed by the scribes. And these would have been experts of the law, and they say this might be even the same account. Okay. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that Jesus answered them well, asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? And Jesus answered, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandments greater than these. And the scribe said to him, you are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and there's no other besides him, and you to love him with all the heart, with all the understanding, and with all the strength, to love one's neighbor as oneself, is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifice. And when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And after that, no one dared to ask him any more questions. And this account, I think, really gives us a good idea of Jesus's answer. And so before I even jump into it, let's just pray, and we're going to jump into our message today. Heavenly Father, I feel ill prepared, not because of not preparing, but ill prepared to preach on such an important text and important response that you give that challenges us and consider how we live our faith out. Father, your truth is amazing, and this is one of the most important verses that have impacted my life, and I pray will impact our lives as a body and how we live out purpose, passion, and presence as a church. And I pray that you guide us, bless us, strengthen us, and teach us, and mold us, and humble us, and transform us for your glory to live out. What does it mean to live out this faithful life in you? In Jesus Christ's name, amen. And so the people here in Matthew 22 and in Mark, they have been contending with Jesus. The reason they've been contending is they're trying to stump Jesus. The reason is to check if he's legit or not. Is he real? Is he the real thing or not as a teacher? Does he know the law? And the question, essentially what they're asking, is what does it mean to live a faithful life? How can I be a faithful Christian? What are the foundations? What are my beliefs? And they wanted to make sure he knew what he was talking about. If he's really who he says he is, that he's some sort of teacher, a rabbi, if he's the Christ, he would have to know these things. And Jesus' response today in Matthew 22 and Mark 12, what it gives us is something of a wisdom that I hope will challenge you in the way you live out your faith in Christ, how you will live out your following Jesus for the rest of your lives. And how as a church, if we think this way and we live this way, it has a radical effect on our community, on our world around us, not just within, but without. And so today's sermon title is To Live Faithfully from Law to Love. To live faithfully from law to love. It's a long title. And what the 3 points I'm going to look at is today is that there's a problem that we all struggle with, and it's the problem of the how. How do we do it? The problem. And then there's a life that we're called to actually live as Christians, right? And it's shown in the law, right? but there's something more to it. And the way that we can actually do it. So it's the problem, the life, the way. The problem with the hows that we all have, the life that we all need to live, and in the way that we can live this out. Now, when you read verses 34 to 36 in Matthew 22, the problem with the how, what you see it happening here is Jesus has been consecutively encountering people questioning his legitimacy, and they just want to test him in their own ways. He had just, it says here, shut down, silence the Sadducees. And the word for silence there is like to muzzle a dog, like to put a muzzle on a dog so it can't bark. And now he's being confronted by the Pharisees. So the Sadducees, what I would paint them as, are they are Jewish folks, but they had a very liberal understanding of their faith. They saw certain things differently. But the Pharisees, I would envision, are the more conservative types. They are the people that held a very high view of God's word, which is a good thing, and lived it out. And I want you to understand this is important because the Pharisees often are painted as bad guys, but they genuinely wanted to live out their faith well. And here, one of their experts, an expert of the law, who knew the Bible, knew the Hebrew Bible well, knew the law, the Ten Commandments, the multiple commandments, poses a question. And his question comes in the verse. He says, Teacher, verse 36, which is the great commandment in the law? Which is the great commandment? And his intention, obviously, is a little sketchy. He's kind of trying to see if Jesus is legit, right? They don't think of him as God. They don't think of him as Messiah, but they want to know if he really believes. Does he know the law? Because if he doesn't know the law, they can immediately dismiss him. And what he says is very powerful, because if you understand the law, which we don't as understand as well as the people then, we know we have to obey it. We know what's important to follow God, but how do we do it is the question that this guy is asking. How do we do it? What is the great commandment? What is the way that is like, if you could boil it all down, is the way we could just live it out? What is that shortcut? What is that answer that you can give in a succinct manner that tells me how to live out my faith faithfully? And that's a test. But how many commandments are there really in the law? And approximately, according to one of the ancient rabbis that counted down all the numbers, and what the Jewish law says is there's about 613 commandments. 613. Out of 613 commandments, the Pharisees were asking him, how do we live up to that entire list of laws? How do we obey it all? Surely there has to be a way that we can kind of boil it down to something that is manageable. And the point of contention here is that for the many Jewish folks is that to live out these 613 commands is it's a lot of stipulations, a lot of things that you have to do. And for them, these laws were crafted for them to understand how to live it out to honor God. And so they saw it's very important to do so. Can we actually accomplish it? And I think that ties to the question of how. How do we live out our faith faithfully? How do we live our faith when we see all these rules, see all these laws, and we don't like rules? Real talk here. None of us, okay, some of us do like rules. Some of us like the boundaries. But what I'm saying is we don't, this feels oppressive. To have so many laws, it can feel very discouraging. And I think the reason why is that in our world today, um, we have been given kind of a perspective that freedom is equated to living the lives the way we want, and we can do whatever we want, and that freedom is something that cannot be infringed upon, that life shouldn't have so much control over us, that we can dictate our lives. And to the Jews here, the 613 commandments may have seemed somewhat overwhelming, maybe not, I wouldn't say impossible, but very difficult to uphold. And to us today, to many of us, I think Christianity is perceived as restrictive. Christianity is about do's, about don'ts. And we ask very similar questions. Do we have to do all these things that the Bible says? Do we have to live a certain way? And I think the reason is our definition of freedom is to be ability to do however we like to do. The definition of freedom in our world today is the absence of restriction. And the truth is, I think we all really need rules to live. If you think we don't need rules, rules actually are sometimes for your sake, for saving you. I'll give you a few examples. And these are examples I've heard before, but I really like them. It's like if you're an astronaut and you're in space, The rules are you need to keep your helmet on and keep your spacesuit on, right? Why? It keeps you alive. If you took it off in space, you'll die, right? For whatever scientific reasons, but right? And if you're a fish, you're not a fish, but pretend you're a fish and you're in water and you're like, I want to go on land. Now, you could go on land. You have the freedom to go on land, but you'll probably die because you can't breathe outside of water, right? And I just think of it as like a kid playing on a sidewalk. The little kid will say, hey, mom and dad, I want to go run on the road. I want to run on Williams right now, right? And mom and dad are like, you could go on Williams to run, but it will probably lead to something dangerous happening, right? Car accident or something tragic. And so by restricting you, it's to preserve you, to save you. And so the thing is, we can't live without rules, but we can't live with only just rules. Right? Too little rules, it feels too loosey-goosey, too chaotic. There's not enough boundaries. And then sometimes we can even see it as we have too many rules, and that feels very oppressive, very heavy. So what is that balance? And that's why Jesus's words in Matthew 22 today is really important, because what he shows us is that we've been thinking of the law all wrong. It's not just about being denied freedoms, right? But that there is a need for some freedom. So how do we get there? That's the question. And this leads me to my second point, the life that we all have to live, that we are called to live. And Jesus's response here answers a question that I think we've heard so many times. We've heard this statement. I read it like 3-4 times already in Matthew 22, and it's kind of lost its beauty, its power, the dynamicness of the statement. But what he's saying here, if you just give it some time and soak it in, it has the profoundness to change your life, because he outlines how the Christian, how a follower of God is called to live. And after his response here, there's no questions. They can't ask him any more questions because, in a sense, he's undermined their statement, their paradigm. You see, they wanted something simplified, of an answer that would shortcut and understand the whole of the law. And he challenges their very assumption. What is the law about then? That's the question you have to ask. What is this law all about? And Jesus' response basically boils it down. So this is what the law is really about. What are the 10 commandments? If you just want to simplify from the 613, just the 10 that we've studied together, the law all about. And if you've been with me through Exodus, I've explained this before, right? Jesus, if he gives an answer here and he gives one statement, he says, you know what? It's not to murder. It's to read the Bible, to worship God only. That's a good thing, okay? If it's only one statement, it would merely have added to the lawyer's question. He would have been like, you know what? That's all I have to do then. I just have to do this to be okay with God. If I don't steal, right? If we don't steal, right? If I just don't bear false witness, if I honor my parents, if I just don't commit adultery, then I'll be good. But what Jesus does here is he doesn't pick and choose the best law out of the 613. He doesn't go 613, I'm going to pick the needle in the haystack. He does something far different. He says, notice things. He says two of them. He points out two of them, verse 38, verse 39. He says, the great and first is the greatest commandment law. And he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. But he doesn't just stop there. He says, but there's a second like it. So out of 613, he says, you want a narrow answer, but your question isn't really capturing the point. It's not good enough of a question. And so I'm going to give you the real answer, the best response. And he gives him two responses. He quotes Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 in verse 37. And then he quotes, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, which is referencing Leviticus chapter 19. Why does he do that? Why does he quote these two? Okay. And the reason he does this is what he's saying is the law, it's about love. It's about love. On these two laws hangs, that word depend, hangs all the law and the prophets, all the biblical foundations, all the foundational things, the entire Hebrew law and Bible hang on these two statements like two nails in the wall that holds a poster or a sign up. And the law is all about law of love, and love is defined by the law. Both contribute to this. Love defines how we are to live lawfully, because the ultimate pursuit of living out the law is for the sake to glorify God, to love God, and to love our neighbor. And this is how you are to live out the law. It's to do so with love. What if you just did everything out of love? Think about it. If you just did everything about love, you look at the 10 Commandments, it says, don't commit adultery. You shall not commit adultery. What? Love your spouse faithfully. If don't steal, what does that mean? Be a loving, generous neighbor. Consider your neighbor. Think of them, love them. So you don't want to take from them. Don't bear false witness. Be a loving and honoring in your words, in your speech, in the promises you make, in the oaths you make if you make an oath. Why you live out love is about where your heart is. It's not about keeping rules. It's about loving people, loving God. And when you start to love and have that heart of love, it changes how you look at the law and the 10 Commandments. Because God gives us the law to teach us how to love Him and to love those around us. He didn't just write this for us to just say we need to honor and keep it, but how we are to love. And so, how can we look at this law? When you start to understand how the law is about love, then it really just, to be honest, makes it very difficult to live it out. Because by giving us this perfect example of what it means to live out the law, what Jesus has done is given us something really hard to live up to. And I want you to see what comes first. It's very interesting. What first comes here isn't neighborhood love, right? Not neighbor love. It comes out of the first statement, which is to love your Lord, your God, with your heart, mind, soul, and strength. The only motivation for our law keeping is because we are so in love with God. Verse 37. That's why we started last sermon with love the Lord your God. And I focused on that because from that overflow leads to our love of our neighbor. You are supposed to be, you're to be so in love with God in every way of your life that you love Him with everything. And it overflows into how you love the people around you. And that's kind of how love works, right? Anyone here that has ever dated, anyone here that's ever been married, I would say you would understand this because you may not have liked something, right? But over time, because of that person you fall in love with, you start to love what they love. You fall in love with what they love. I can only assume um, we love similar things, otherwise we wouldn't have been together. But Joyce is really healthy, right? I love bacon and pork, but she loves chicken and she loves being healthy, eating fruits and vegetables, but she also loves a lot of sweets. I found lately I eat a lot more sweets because I'm not a sweet person, but because of her, I've started to enjoy what she loves. And as time deepens a relationship with someone, you start to align in a lot of passions and joys for things. What things I love, she starts to enjoy them too. And same way, back and forth. And I think in the same way, when we love, it overflows. Our God, a love for God deepens and is enriched. That affects the way we love, like He loves. And the problem and the danger of how we live out our faith is that we don't do it out of love. The danger happens as we start to do things because we think if I just do these things, then God will love me, if I will be accepted by God. And that is the premise of the question by the Pharisee here. I want you to understand the lawyer here, when he asks this question, right? What he's asking is, what do I need to do for God ultimately to accept me and to love me? What is the greatest commandment? If you could just tell me the answer, then I'll know how to please and honor God. That's what he's asking. And that's what Jesus destroys here with a wrecking ball, with this statement. He says, not just one command, two commands, because your answer you're expecting is too narrow of an expectation. He's saying that we don't have to earn our love with God. There's nothing that you and I can do to earn this love from God. And somehow, in a way, for us to live in this love has been, we feel like we need to earn this love. And it's only when you start to see that the law starts with a deep love for God that we see that we're not shaped by just a need to please Him, but it's often kind of connected to our a motivation for out of fear that we're not good enough, that we have to earn this love from God. And Jesus' answer destroys that. It's not a love that says you can do whatever you want, that the law matters. The law does matter, right? And I want you to understand the law is important. It shows us how to love. But if you live only by the law, and that's the only reason why you're doing it out of the need to just honor the law. You're not doing it out of love. And if we just do it just to get love from God, it can't just be to get love from God, right? It has to be also lived out in the law. And then if you do it for the wrong motivations, if you ever try to just get God's love so that he can love you and that others will respect you, the danger of that is the law will crush you and destroy you. And the only way the law becomes life-giving, okay, it's not when you obey to get something, but when you obey to give it to others. That's when you start to do it for God's sake, not for your own sake, not to earn something from God, but from an overflow of understanding God and living out his love. And so I'm sorry, I'm a little convoluted, but right here, but ask yourself this question. Do you do things or live out your faith, your relationship with God out of fear? That you do it because you feel like you need to honor God. I know some of you grew up in the church and you go, I go to church on Sundays. I do these things because I feel if I don't do them, I'm not a good Christian. That's out of fear that God might not accept me, right? And do you do things then or live out your faith out of pride? For some of us here, we do it because we want others to look at us and say, hey, you're someone that knows the Bible well. You're respectable. You're a good person. That's out of an ego. I need to show you're better. If those are your reasons, then those are the motivations that often are driving you to live out your faith. That's not out of love, right? That's out of what you do. And you're doing it to get love from God, to get love from other people. And the reason we are shaped by this, you're motivated by the wrong reasons. And that's not love. It's self-love. And what Jesus gives us here, okay, is something very different. He says, a love that has been freely given, you have to know that God loves you, that you have been given a love first by God. And from your understanding that you're to love him because he's already loved you, you do these things as a result, however imperfect you are or have been. And this is so redemptive because God has accepted you. He has redeemed you. And therefore, you can live a life of faith and obedience. You don't obey so you can get God's love. God has already loved you. And as a result, you live a life of worship and worshipful obedience for him. And the reason I say this is this happens a lot in our thinking. We say we live out of love, right? For God, for others. But when you read Deuteronomy 6, if you remember, to love God is to also remember what God has already done, right? And God had already saved his people. God had redeemed them, and then he gave them the law. He saved them, and then he gave them the law to show them how to love one another and to flourish as God's people. And so how do we live this out? And that leads me to my last point today, the way we live this out. And I want you to notice, if you go to Mark, right, but you can also see it in Matthew 21, Jesus here is at the temple. He's at the heart of the Jewish faith, where people would come to make sacrifices. Why? Because the people, they believed that the sacrifices that we're making would make them right with God. They said, if I just do these things, I make these sacrifices, God will accept me. Then I can have a relationship with God. And Jesus here in Mark 12 finishes this conversation, and you see their reasons, right? And Jesus's response is really interesting. Jesus's response, he gives the same answer for Matthew 22 and Mark 12. But in Mark 12, the scribe responds, says in verse 32, you are right, teacher. You have said that he is the one, that no one besides him, and to love him with all the heart, with all the understanding, with all the strength, to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more, verse 33. It's all, your answer is right, because it's much more important than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices, right? The scribe, the Pharisee understood it's not about what you do, okay? The core value is not in what you do. It is in the fact that you love God. It's more than those sacrifices. And if you believe that it's just in what you do, and you believe in obedience as the way to get God's love, like the worship and sacrifice by bringing something to the temple, right? You'll think just like the Pharisees and scribes here, right? I just have to do these things. I have to bring an offering or sacrifice to God. I have to have lived a good week of faith. I had to read my Bible more. I had to go to prayer meeting, go to Oasis this week, or go to MCF. I have to go to Salt Shaker. And I'm not saying those are wrong. Those are good things. But by going, I am good with God. By doing these things, I'm good with God. And that will never equate to honoring these two commands of love. Because it's not about being religious, living to please God out of a fear or trying to serve others by pleasing others out of pride. It starts with realizing that you cannot do anything to earn this love that God gives. And when you read these two commands, it should really bother you. When Jesus' answer comes, it should really distress you, because it's really hard to love like this, to love God first like this. But to love other people with such abundant love is so stressful. How are you to devote yourself to such a love? We all fail at it. We don't even love our family members well. And some of us who are married, we know we don't even love our spouses perfectly. We struggle with that. And so, what is the possible hope that we have? And I would say is that the whole debate that they try to throw at Jesus is made obsolete because there's nothing they can do. Who could fully honor this command to love God completely, to love our neighbors as himself creatively? And I would say there's only one person that could have done this. And he didn't do it out of just obedience, out of fear of God, right? But love of God. He loved his Father. He loved us. And then he did it out of that desire, that heart for us. It says, interestingly, in Matthew chapter 5, if you go to Matthew 5 in the Beatitudes, people assume Jesus comes and he destroys the law. We don't have to live by the law. No. He says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not the smallest aspect, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, hold on, I'm trying to see. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so, or to do the same, will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Right? And in this verse, who could fully honor this? Who could fully live it out to accomplish the law in its perfection? To live out what it means to love God with everything you have, to love your neighbor as yourself. Only Christ did that. Only Christ did that. He lived a perfect life. He died a horrible death. And he resurrected, overcoming the grave injustice of our sins, placing him there, so that you and I could experience the fullness of a relationship with him. I'm today, this morning, I'm just take a moment. This morning for the devotional time, my friends and I, in our prayer, basically the servant team that serves and sets up everything, we looked at Mark 15. We looked at the death of Jesus. And we remembered what Christ did for us, that he lived a perfect life. He died a horrible death, but it was such a humiliating way to die. And as Jesus is dying on the cross, it's not the pain of the nails that hurts more. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's the loss of fellowship with his Father that he cries out about. Do you realize the amount of love that God would give to do such a thing for us? You have been loved in such a manner that you will never experience that separation because of what Christ has accomplished on the cross. And he honored it so perfectly, honoring it in such a manner, and so that we, even when we fall short, can still live it out because of his grace. And that's kind of why I keep driving in. It's not what you do that you can earn this. Jesus says here, what is the greatest commandment? He says, this is the thing, and it's all on this. But who can actually accomplish it? Even we can't, if not for Christ who has made us whole in him. And because of that wholeness, we live it out. That's why we live out this command to love God created completely and to love our neighbors creatively, because he has made us whole with God so we can do so. We can be the vehicles of grace for his glory. Um, there's a quote by Erwin McManus. It's in a book. Erwin McManus is a pastor who I sometimes like some of his stuff he says. I really love this quote, and it's from a book called The Artisan's Soul, Crafting Your Life into a Work of Art. He says, love is the defining mark of the church, but we have far too often fallen short of the mark. Still, we don't give up on love. We continue to make it our ideal. We understand that this is God's standard. We are most human when love is our motive. It is the same with creativity. God created us through the universe's most creative and intimate act. We are the results of a creative act by a creative God. He designed us in his image, his own image. He designed us with both intellect and imagination. He designed us with both reason and passion. He designed us to dream, to risk, and to create. Though we may create many beautiful works of art, the most important works of art to which we will ever give ourselves are the lives we live as people loving God and loving our neighbors. And how we do that as a church is something I've been praying for our community. And I think Pastor Joey wanted that. Our leaders want that. Is that as a community, how will we live out to love God so thoroughly and to love our neighbors so creatively? And I think we fall short. We will fall short. We will be discouraged if we just do it to earn God's love. But what if I told you, you know what? God already loves you. You have nothing to earn anymore because you've been given that freely. And now, because you've been given such a great gift, go and love others well. Out of the abundance of God's love others creatively. How much more freeing is that? I had a great conversation with a friend in our church many years ago, like maybe not many years ago, 3 years ago. I remember a friend telling me, I have a hard time working out. And I go, I agree. I don't like working out. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make sure I don't slip the person. And the person just says, I have a history of just not wanting to work out. It's discouraging because like I work out for a short while and I get discouraged and I don't want to. And then I see maybe Mickey D's or some snacks or dessert and I get caught up with it and I get discouraged, right? And I'm like, I totally get this. Right? I totally get this. And I think it's because deep down, when we work out, well, maybe my friend and I, we work out because we want to do something to please God. We want to honor God by being healthy, right? And that's not a bad thing. But I said, what if we stopped doing it out of like an obligation of feeling a sense of guilt or, out of a need to do something to earn something? But what if we did it out of just worship, right? What if we turned it into something out of obedience, out of God already loves me for who I am. I don't have to be any more. But God calls me to treat my body like a temple and to live it out for him, for his glory. It turns it from a guilty need to please to something deeper. It's worship. When you work out, why don't we work out as a praise to God? It frees you from the obligation as shame, a guilt when you fail, right? And I don't know what that person remembers, but I hopefully encouraged them in that sense. But I think it encouraged me because then I started like on the treadmill a lot, on machine regularly, making it a worship. I always remind myself, today is a day of worship. I'm already been loved by God, and as a result, I live it out in praise and how I will continue to honor him. When you love him, you're not doing it to please him, to earn anything from him, because you can never. We're stained and polluted, right? But because of his grace, we have been made whole. So when we come to our infinite God, we have this relationship that's beautiful. And out of that beautiful relationship, we can love others creatively, dynamically, and freely. And that becomes a worship. To love others is to worship God through that, our love. And so I might be going all over the place. I kind of lost train of thought for a few times. My hope is that you would consider that as we move forward as a community. What if our community didn't do it out of obligation to obey the law in some form that is somehow to earn God's love, but we as a church community was to love from that grace that Christ first gave us? It would be very different. It'd be very different. And yeah, that's kind of where I want to end today. And as I finish that, I want to pray for us, and then we're going to take communion together as a remembrance of what Christ has done together. So um, let us pray. Father, didn't come. It's tough. It's tough to sometimes share something so important, and sometimes that's a reminder, Lord, that it's not in our control. It's not in our hands, but it's in your hands. And Lord, however the sermon may have come or unfolded, Lord, it is your work being done. I pray I've been faithful, but I pray, Father, that your word would speak into the hearts of all those gathered, that we would reconsider where our lives are. Have we been living lives where we simply see these things as things to do, to earn a relationship with you? Or are we free from that obligation to earn, and it's been given to us by grace through what you've done first? And from that, may we live it out in obedience and praise. Father, may we love you so much, and may from that overflow of loving you affect all that we do, how we love others, how we love our community, how we love our friends, how we love our family, especially, how we love our colleagues. May that challenge us in all ways. Not that we're earning, Lord, some credibility with you, Father, but out of just a beautiful overflow of the love that you've already shown us. Break our heart for what breaks yours, Lord. Teach us to love what you love. How you loved us, may we love others as well, realizing we've been loved in spite of our sinfulness by a gracious and good God, and transform our hearts today. And as we take communion today, I pray that you would attune our hearts once more to your truth, to your promise, that we are a part of something greater, and it's real. And when we take it, we are partaking in this truth of what you have accomplished. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. Oh, sorry. So if you take a moment to grab your communion elements, for communion, we take it. Three reasons I always write down, but hopefully you guys kind of take a moment to think about it, is to remember what Christ has done. Not only to remember, but to reflect on how it affects our world, affects us, and for us to celebrate, to rejoice in it, to rejoice in the comfort of knowing Him and have this relationship with Him, to remember, to reflect, and to rejoice. So we remember what has happened in the past, reflect on how it works in the present, rejoice in how God will continue to unfold it into the future. It's a moment that historically, when we take communion, we're doing it as though we're doing it alongside the entire body of Christ. From before till now to tomorrow, we're taking communion in remembrance of what Christ has accomplished. And so in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 to 26, Paul records these words. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, he took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke this bread, and he said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way also, he took the cup, which is after supper, and he said these words, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and you drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." And so let's recite together the Apostles' Creed. And as we finish reciting it together, then we will partake of these elements together. And I will pray, and then Allison will guide us into our praise and worship. Okay. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Ghost, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell. On the third day, he rose again. He ascended into heaven and is seated on the right hand of the Father. and he will come again to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. Let us take the communion elements together. Father, we thank you for this moment to remember what you've done, to reflect on how it has happened and what it does in our lives, and to rejoice that we are not dead to our sins, but we are made anew in you through your Son Christ and through his resurrection promise and hope. And may we run into that marvelous light worshiping you today. May we love you with our heart, mind, soul, and strength. May we love our neighbors so creatively as you have loved us. In Jesus Christ's name.